There are times when you're working on a model or a mesh and you want to, instead of extending the geometry in different directions to add, more extrusions, bevels, or extended edges, that you just want to add additional polygons where polygons already exist in order to give you more power for adding detail onto the surface of your objects, or to just make them smoother or do other things like that. So there are a couple of different ways that you can add extra divisions within your polygonal surfaces here inside of Modo. And this is essentially going to break down into two large categories, and that's going to be slicing or dividing. So let's look at slicing first. The idea behind slicing is to simply take and add additional edges or an additional edge at some point in your geometry. The first tool that we'll look at exists here inside of the basic section of our modeling tab, and that is the slice tool, which is accessed with Shift-C. So all of our slicing tools are actually going to be working with variations on the C key. So Shift-C, C by itself, or Alt-C, and we'll see this here in a moment. So with Shift-C, we get the slice tool. And the point of the slice tool is essentially to work something like a blade, where we take one point, go to a second point, and we create a clean line in between those 2 points. All right, so let me reset these options back to the default here, and we can see what's actually going to happen here. So this is usually something that you'll want to do in an orthographic viewport, because if you're just cutting through space, even with the work plane, it can be a little bit difficult to find the 2 points that you're actually connecting together or slicing between. So I'm going to do this right now. I'm just going to start in the right-hand viewport. You could also do the top or the side, that the other side, that works as well. But let's just go ahead and click and then drag across. And you can see that as I drag, I create the second point, and where I initially clicked was the first point. Now, as soon as I release, it doesn't just initiate the tool, but it actually remains interactive. As with many of Modo's modeling tools, you can actually work on them after putting the tool down. So now you can see I've got this tool, and it's slicing through this group of polygons here a little bit diagonally. And if we look at it in the front view, you can see that there's that diagonal, but it's coming top to bottom based on that view, but it's going straight across that way. And then in the top view, we can see that it's just going straight through, and in the perspective view, you can see the actual slicing plane that has been created. So between these 2 points with this orientation, that plane is just going infinitely through the scene and will slice pretty much anything that's in the way, as long as that layer is active. So now let's go ahead and look at some of the options that we have for creating this slice. So here's the initial slice. Great. Now we have a few extra things that we can do, and let's just move all the way down to the middle section here, which is kind of where the meat of the extra options are. Now, the first one is going to be to split the geometry. And what that will do is it will actually create 2 distinct kind of geometric islands on either side of the slice. So now the top side is a separate piece, and the bottom side is a separate piece. Now you could go and select the top carefully and then cut it and paste it back in to separate them, or you could cut it and paste it into a separate layer, and that works as well. But if you know you're going to actually be cutting into 2 distinct pieces to work on, then you can just turn on the split tool, and it will actually make a slice and then separate those 2 pieces of geometry from each other. Now, the next option you have is to create a gap. So if we turn up the gap here, and let's just go up a little bit, maybe 15 millimeters or so, we can zoom in here and see that there is now a space or an edge on either side of the edge that I've created. Now, if we look at this in the perspective view, you can see that there is now actually a gap, and now we have 2 distinctly separate pieces that are no longer even touching. Now, you can also have that gap turned on without the split. So if I turn off split, you can see that now instead of just creating a single edge through, it's creating one edge on either side of the edge that I was creating. And you can also choose, if you have split on, to cap off the remaining sections. So now you can see I've got one big polygon that's kind of just making up the bottom section there on both halves of this this piece of geometry. So you can adjust this, and you can also choose to offset it either from the center, which is what we have now, but we could also choose to make it a positive offset. So now our edge is acting as one side of the cut, and then it moves up, in this case 17.6 millimeters from that edge, or we could go the other direction too, into negative. All right, so let's go back and set that back to center, and now you can see that that we've made some nice slices in our geometry. All right, I'm going to go ahead and drop the tool, and let's look at some other ways that we can slice. Now, to get to these, we'll go down to the Mesh Edit tab, so we can see where they are. You see we have Edge Slice and loop slice are our next two options. There are some other slices that you can do, but we're just going to loop at these few here to get you started. So let's start by looking then at the edge slice, and this is the C key is the hotkey. And what this allows us to do is actually just create edges one at a time across a surface. For example, if we take this group of polygons right here, perhaps I want to add, a cut that starts at the middle here and moves up and then around through here and down there, just so I can have some extra geometry to work with inside of these existing polygons. Well, all we have to do is click on any point in space. You can start in the middle of a polygon, but usually it works out best if you start on an edge or a vertex. So I'm going to start here on this edge. And I'm going to click, and that now creates a point for me to slice from. So I'm going to go from here, and through this polygon that's highlighting here, I just want to go all the way up and make a slice up to this point. All right. But let's say through this polygon, I actually want to come up to a point here and then over. So I'm just going to click in the middle of the face, and you can see that it's creating another point. It's actually being stuck to the polygon that's there, but it allows me to put it kind of wherever I want based off of screen space. Then I'm going to make another point here, and then do the same thing kind of moving down. So a point there, a point here, and a point there. And now I've got some new geometry created. Now, some things that you can do as you create these slices, some nice things that you can notice here is you can choose to snap to values. So you could do something like snap these to every 10% or something like that if you want to get more distinct positions across the surface of a polygon or an edge, and that way you're not going to have quite so much granularity. You see, as I click and drag this, it changes by fairly small increments, and if I zoom in closer, I'll get even more control. See, it's going down to actually 0.5% increments that it's moving by. But you can also choose to increase that to get a little bit more snapping going on. So this will allow us to have some good extra ways to add geometry here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if I slice through a polygon like this one, I still have a nice four-sided polygon in here. Let's go ahead and press Q to drop my tool. So I have a nice four-sided polygon here, 2, 3, 4. But up here, I've got a kind of big n-gon now where I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides now. So I may want to do a little bit of geometric cleanup. And again, you can use the slice tool for this. I could just press the C key again. Maybe I just want to connect this vertex to that vertex, and now I have two four-sided polygons. So I could do this also over here just by holding the Shift key and then adding a second slice here from this point to that point, and now I've got some cleaned up geometry. Obviously, I would want to go and continue to clean up on other areas, but that's just an idea of how you can use this slice tool to clean up your geometry. And this is actually a very powerful usage for the slice tool. Is sometimes as you're modeling, you'll end up with some polygonal structures that can be kind of weird, or are rendering in a way that's not optimal because they're either big n-gons with 8 or 12 or 7 sides or something, and you want to divide those up in a way that gives you something that's a little smoother and cleaner. You can do that fairly easily with the slice tool, just going in and connecting some edges, connecting some vertices, and creating some cleaner geometry to work with. So now you can see that I actually have a nice loop of polygons that runs all the way around here, and then I have four-sided polygons right inside of there. So I've created some fairly clean geometry in spite of the fact that I was here kind of cutting willy-nilly across the surface. All right, so moving on, one of the very common slices that you'll use is the loop slice tool. And this is accessed again right here in the Mesh Edit tab, but also with the Alt-C command. And what this will do is allow you to slice through an entire loop of polygons and create extra edges within them. Now, to start this off, you can either select a couple of polygons to define the loop, or you can select an individual edge, and then it will slice across that edge and the related loop of polygons that goes through it. So you can see this edge here that I have selected connects the two polygons on either side. And so it's in essence the same as selecting those two polygons and then launching the tool. So with this edge selected, I'll now slice all the way through this loop of polygons. So I'm going to press Alt-C, and then just click in the viewport to start the tool. And you can see that it's created this nice loop of polygons all the way around, and it's got these two extra edges that I've added. So let's look at some of the features that we have of the loop slice tool so we can see what's going on here. So the first thing that we have here is our edit mode, which mainly is something that we'll leave on move and don't have to worry too much about. The next thing is the mode. So symmetry, in this case, means that as I click and drag these individual points, you can see I drag these in and out, I only have to drag one edge, and it's going to keep the other edge on the equal and opposite sides. So if I'm at 30% or if I'm at 20%, this one will be at 80%. And so it just keeps that balanced out. Now I can also choose to increase the count. So right now I have 2. If I put this down to 0 and I'm set to symmetry, it's going to stay locked in the middle and I won't be able to change that. But if I go up to say 3, it's going to take the middle point and that one will lock down because it doesn't have a mirrored pair. But I can click and drag on the individual other edges and it will keep those mirrored around the center point. As I increase this more, I will get the option to work also in symmetry, but it will be one pair at a time. And all I have to do is click and drag on these individual sets of edges in order to create more geometry. The nice thing about this is it's going to keep clean polygonal loops. So it's going to keep your geometry and your topology very nice and clean. It's not going to create any extra n-gons or anything strange like that. And you'll end up with nice clean geometry to work with. Aside from working in symmetry, I can also make these uniform. I can make them free, which allows me to just place each individual edge by itself. Uniform will take whatever number I have and divide up the space evenly. And then I also have the uniform button, which if I click, will just take all of my individual slices and uniformly spread them out. So same thing as going to uniform mode. So oftentimes I'll keep this on either free or symmetry and not have to change over to uniform because I can simply click the button in order to get that to happen. All right, so a couple of other options that you have here that you may need is going to be to slice the selected, which slices only the polygons you've selected. Now, sometimes you want to do that. In this case, I only had one edge selected. So what this is actually going to do is create a series of vertices along this edge. So what I'm going to do is drop the tool here and just select these polygons and do the same thing so you can see how it works. And with slice selected set, if I click on the uniform here to start it, you'll see it only slices through my selected geometry, which will again create n-gons on either side, but there are times when you want to add some geometry in a real specific area and only there, and this will allow you to do that. If I turn that off, you'll see that it now goes all the way through again. Now, another option you have is to slice through n-gons. By default, the loop slice will terminate if it hits an n-gon, but if you have slice n-gon on, it will try to continue your slices cleanly through a more than 4-sided surface. And then the last option that we'll look at here is the preserve curvature option. And what that does is it allows you to retain the perceived curve of your surface, which if we zoom in here on this right-hand view, you can see right now I've got a straight edge above and below the extra slices. But since the edges coming in are implying a curve, both incoming and outgoing, with preserve curvature on, it's going to attempt to keep that curve as it subdivides. So you can see if I turn this off, this edge gets nice and flat. If I turn this on, we get a nice curve that's trying to just add additional geometry, but retain that surface so that I don't get even more faceted looking surfaces. Okay, so that does it for the slice tools. Let's now look very quickly over at our subdivision tools. So I'm going to press N to get a new mesh layer. And then I'm going to add in another sphere. I'm going to use a quad ball sphere. This is exactly what I have in here in the viewport right now, actually, with 7 subdivisions. And then just click apply. And I'm going to hide that first layer for now. So now you can see I've got this sphere that's been created out of 4-sided polygons. Now, the subdivision tools, really, you only have a couple of options, but these are good to know about. Now, the first one is just going to be your button here that's the SDS subdivide. So if I click on this, it's just going to take my geometry and it's going to cut every 4-sided polygon up into 4 4-sided polygons. So it will cut it horizontally and vertically, and it will attempt to just smooth the geometry based off of this. Now, this uses a particular subdivision surface algorithm to create that. We'll look at subdivision surfaces alone in the next chapter, but there are essentially 2 types of subdivision surfaces. There are the SDS subdivisions, which will actually be something that we don't use as frequently, and then there are the Catmull-Clark, or sometimes they're called the Pixar subdivision surfaces, which we'll use more frequently. So in order to access those, there's another option here. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that, and I'll press Shift-D, and this will bring up my subdivide polygons menu. And there are actually 4 options here, but typically we'll only deal with 2 of them. So the first one is going to be faceted. And what that will do is it will just divide every polygon up into 4 polygons, and it will keep any flat polygon flat. So it's not going to do any smoothing or anything like that. So if you watch the profile here in the right-hand view or in this top view, when I click OK, you'll see that it hasn't changed that faceting. It's just adding in extra edges. So a vertical and a horizontal edge for each individual polygon. Now, if I press Shift D again and we look here at the Catmull-Clark version, we'll see as we watch the profile that it will get much smoother. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. You can see now it actually has become much smoother. And this is going to be the same type of subdivision that we'll use when we typically use subdivision surface inside of Modo. So this is the hard way of doing it that adds those polygons actually into the scene, which sometimes you'll want to do so that you can add in additional detail. Then other times you'll just want to use subdivision surfaces and let those details be there in the subds. All right, so that does it for dividing polygons. This is a very powerful way of adding detail either selectively or globally to your objects, and will allow you to add more detail and more depth to your 3D models in your creation process. Thanks, and I will see you in the next lesson.